Fires raged. People stormed the tower. Uneducated hooligans screaming chants of freedom, liberty, and death. This was the Peasant Revolt of 1381. After the bubonic plague of the 14th century, many thought they had been blessed. Many saw surviving the Black Death meant that God had favored them, and that they should have a more fruitful life. After all, they were the 33% that the plague didn't kill. Many of the lowest class in England's feudal system of the time thought that they needed to reform more than others. The feudal system was like a pyramid. King on the top of the pyramid, then came those of the church, barons, knights, and the lowest, peasants, making about 1/3 of the country's population at the time. The lords issued strips of their land for the peasants to farm on. After a great percentage of the population diminished, they needed more workers. At first, peasants traveled to the countryside for better pay. The landlords were promised better conditions and pay. Then, laws were issued out against it. The peasants still received part of what they grew, much like sharecropping. After the plague, the peasants wanted more freedom and pay from their lords or barons. They knew that with the lower population, there was a larger demand for people who needed to grow produce. Many taxes were weighing down on the peasants' debts, and they needed higher wage to pay the taxes. Their mortgages were raised along with an enormous poll tax, and a tax that enforced that no peasant should be paying more than what they would before the Black Death. At first, the poll tax was the least of their worries. They just didn't pay it. Then, commissioners were issued to villages so that no one would avoid the poll tax. The commissioners enraged peasants, especially for their brutality against the village women. They would often check to see if a woman was married in a way that was intensely violating. Many villagers had had enough. A group of enraged peasants from Essex went to talk to their commissioner to ask them not to be as merciless. The quarrel did not go well, and ended with the commissioner and his acquaintances fleeing the scene. This was just the start. John Ball, a priest, spoke many speeches that arose the hidden anger in the serfs. The peasants wanted to do something. Many villages started to begin plans to bring a petition to King Richard II, the current king at the time. John Ball was a major contributor to the revolt. From the beginning, all men by nature were created alike, and our bondage or servitude came by the unjust oppression of naughty men. For if God would have any bondsman from the beginning, he would have appointed who would have had any bond, and who free. And therefore I exhort you to consider that now the time has come appointed to us by God, ye may, if ye will, cast off the yoke of bondage and recover liberty. I counsel you, therefore, well to bethink yourself, and take good heart unto you, that after the manner of a good husband that tilleth his ground, and riddeth out thereof such evil weeds as choke and destroy the good corn, you may destroy first the great lords of the realm, and after the judges and lawyers and questmongers, and all who have undertaken to be against the commons. For so shall you procure peace and surety to yourselves in time to come, and by dispatching out the way of great men, there shall be an equality in liberty, and no difference in degrees of nobility, but like a dignity and equal authority in all things brought in along among you. It is controversial how many leaders of the peasants there were. John Ball was with no doubt whatsoever a leader. The issue at hand is whether Wat Tyler and Jack Straw were the same person. There are many scholars who have theories that Wat Tyler's alias was Jack Straw, but no one truly knows much about the characters involved in the revolt. The serfs marched to London to issue a petition to the king asking for many freedoms that would seem common today. They wanted modern liberties, rights, and everything a man could ask for, or a woman. Unlike many events of the time, women were also involved in the revolt. Many were brave heroes, but they weren't really documented. On the march, many joined the group. They deeply agreed with the peasants. Village by village, it grew into a large mass, ending as 600,000 people, all enraged with their leaders. Once they got to the enormous city, workers also joined the revolt. It turned into a revolution. The peasants gathered in mobs and camped outside London, where they met up with other peasant mobs. Together, the peasants stormed London and destroyed everything in their path. They opened prisons, burned down buildings, and killed everything and anything that stood against them. They burned Savoy Place, the home of King Richard II's uncle, John of Gaunt. The peasants also set fire to the treasury's Highbury Manor. During this, they found all legal documents they could and burned them. The next day, June 14th, 1381, the king set up a meeting with one of the leaders, Wat Tyler, who may also be Jack Straw. Tyler presented King Richard II with the terms that the peasants had put out together. The king agreed to all the terms, and the peasants pledged their allegiance to King Richard. Later, however, some peasants entered the London Tower and invaded royal bedchambers and the privy wardrobe. Some rebels took the Archbishop of Canterbury, the physician, the chancellor, and John of Gaunt. While in the tower, these men were executed immediately. Some considered these men traitors, as they had already made an agreement with the king to have more rights. The next day, at the Smithfield Conference, the peasants demanded an end to all lordships outside the king's. The king agreed to all terms, but apparently the leader, Wat Tyler, addressed the king with insolence. The mayor of London pulled Tyler from his horse later that day. The squire killed Tyler by stabbing him in the stomach. The crowd was about to rush to the city and his men, when the king had the crowd follow him. He led them out of the city while the mayor gathered troops. The mayor's troops surrounded the rebels. King Richard told them that if they went back to their homes peacefully, they would all be pardoned. This was the end of the Peasant Revolt of 1381 in London. Scattered around the rest of Britain, there were outbreaks and uprisings in different towns and regions, but for all one reason: more rights and better pay. However, the main goal of all was the abolition of serfdom, or no more slavery. London was safe on June 16, 1381, and from there on out, the government eventually regained control of all insecure regions of uprisings. After the king decided to revoke his pardon, the king and his men went from village to village looking for any who were involved in the revolt. In the villages of Essex and Hertfordshire, the rebels were dealt with very severely, as they were the investigators of the entire revolt. However, in other villages, the men were given fair trials and released to go on with their lives. The leaders, although most were dead already, were found, captured, and executed. After the Peasant Revolt of 1381, the government never imposed another tax pull again. The Peasant Revolt of 1381 is a turning point in history. It changed people's view on the peasants. They made up most of the population, but were hardly ever thought of as people. Up until the revolt in 1381, the peasants had little to no rights and were treated very poorly. They were overworked and got little in return, especially after the Black Death.